So I'm going to draw a giant, and in order to draw this giant, I'm going to use the basic shapes that we've been using. Bunch of cylinders. And he's going to be standing in front of a house. Guys, see how fast I got this dude? So like, I'm absolutely relying on these shapes that we use, okay? I'm just fully like, I can't draw a giant, you know, but I can draw a bunch of cylinders. And you can get really fast at drawing cylinders, and they're massively applicable to all kinds of things, okay? Notice the way it's got perspective? You see the way it's like I'm below him, he's bigger than me? Okay, so I can go in and start to noodle with it, right? Like I could be like, okay, as a giant, I want for him to have like bigger shoulders. I could start to change this contour. I could want him to have like, I could throw like Iron Man, not Iron Man, who's the guy? Hellboy. I could throw like Hellboy hands on him. See how I'm like throwing on these like giant cylinders for right there? See the way we just like very, very quickly changing up, and I'm starting to add some style and some design, okay? Okay, so the thing about texture is that texture is about little forms, okay? So big forms, and we did big forms, and we talked about shading big forms last class, okay? And now what we're going to move to is we're going to move to little forms, but texture gives us a lot, okay? If, for instance, let's say that I want to change the texture of this guy, and you guys can like go with me or do whatever you want, okay? But I'm going to change the texture of this guy as I move up the figure, okay? So, and I'm going to go through a sort of like evolutionary history as I go up the figure. So his legs and feet down around the bottom, that stuff's going to be made of rocks, okay? So his feet are going to be like, they're going to be rock feet, okay? So how am I going to make the texture of rocks inside of that space? All right. One of the main ways that we have to show texture is this. Okay. See out the window, those trees out the window? I want to call your attention to the edge of them, okay? It's the edge of those. The edge is a deeply informative part of everything that we look at. So you see this wall here? Look at the edge of the wall. That cinder block, the edge of the cinder block, the way it's got those like little things in and out of it. You see this metal pipe here and those things that are like those clamps that are holding the pipes together, and you see the edge quality of those things? Okay, so what I would want to do is if I have to like make this guy's feet out of stone, the first thing that I would want to do is I want to say like what edges are possible here. Like let's say there's an edge that's possible, and I'd start to look for how do they, on the edges, how could it possibly be that this thing has stone The next thing that I want to do is I want to think of like what is okay, a couple of things. One, what is my basic light condition here, right? So if my basic light condition is that my light is coming from, let's say my light is coming from this way, okay, the form of the feet is going to be essentially, the form of the feet is going to be something like this. Right, like that's kind of the form of the foot. Now I'm going to think about a basic light direction. With the light direction, it's going to kind of come this way, like that, and maybe like this, right? And everything that would be over here would be in shadow, and everything that would be over there would be in light. So then now that gives me this edge and this edge also. So that's like, as I come through, if I'm thinking about rocks in this zone, if this is 1 foot like this, okay, this side over here is in shadow. That side over there is in light. I'm going to go over here. This side over here is in shadow. So every volume ends up with, to begin with, 3 critical contours. Okay, so we have this contour right here. We have this contour. And then we have this third contour. And for starters, like for that early drawing that you were just working on, like if you just got this far, that would be fine, right? So a rock is kind of a cube. We could think of a rock as being kind of a cube. But then time and erosion, so these things kind of round, right? The surfaces aren't perfect. So you end up with a shape kind of like that. A rock definitely is a little darker in color. Probably not black, probably not white. A rock is kind of dark in color. It has volume as you move over the top of the rock, away from the light. As you turn away from the light, it's going to look like I'm darkening in a place to have a terminator. I might have a little detail. Kind of looks like a rock. Okay. So now I'm going to go through here and I'm going to start to address smaller forms. Like, so the light direction is this way. Let's say that's a rock, and this is the shadow shape going around it. That might be where the rock ends. Okay, this is the rock in light. It's not white. There's another rock. I'm drawing around it. Got an underside. I'm shaping out the sort of light spaces and dark spaces on these guys. Notice how maintaining the difference between the light family and the shadow family. So now to get to my local value, like I want this to drop down in local value. In order to do that, I got to take my shadow side down a little bit. And now I'm going to drop this down in local value. So the local value drops down to a kind of a little bit of a medium like that. Okay. I can go through and look for parts of occlusion, like places where the form really has like zero light getting in, like these little areas in between the forms. It's just got zero light getting in, and I'm allowed to just like throw a little blackness right in there. Okay, only now, like I want to do the same thing over here real quick. See how critical this outside, really let yourself focus on this outside edge. It's a big deal. Only now I'm going to let myself do a little bit of modeling. I'm going to lighten up some of the areas in light. And I'm going to let myself model down the forms a little bit as they turn. Okay. So then let's say his legs coming up this way are trees, okay? So the first thing that I'm going to do is I want to address the edges. And I want to change the shape a little bit because trees are not so perfect. So I want to change the shape to like this. The light stays the same on this. The light is coming from one direction. So what happens with trees is as they grow, the bark has to stretch. And as the bark stretches, the spaces between it get more defined. So if you have a young tree, the space in the bark it's not very deep. But as a tree gets older and older and older, that space gets really, really deep, and then there's different bark shapes, right? Like you can, sometimes it's like on a cherry tree, it's like little chunks of like, almost like corn chips, like stacked, wrapped around the trunk, right? Whereas if you have a birch tree, it's like sheets of paper that someone ripped, and those are like wrapped around the trunk. Whereas if you have like a hickory tree, those are like sheets of paper that are curling, and it's like these sheets of paper all applied to the tree. So you can come up with whatever shape you want. You can do whatever bark you want to do. One thing is, you don't have as much detail in the shadow. You know, so when you turn out of the shadow, so right here, if this is the shadow shape, and then we're going to turn out of the shadow, as we turn out of the shadow, we're going to get an area of real detail right in here. Like this area that's in the light is going to be a lot more detailed. So let's say I want to make this into like hickory. Okay, if it's hickory, it's going to have these pieces of bark that look like this. And they're going to be kind of long, and they're going to be stacked on top of each other, and they're going to be mounted along the contour of the tree. Okay, so they're going to come up like this. They're going to look like that. And they're about like this. They're not all the same size, but it looks about like that. And they're in here. And as you turn over, so what's going on is, if you imagine this thing, imagine it as having thickness, and as you get around the edge of it, it casts a little shadow. Like these guys would have these little shadows being cast. And another thing is, because you're working on a cylinder, you see this cylinder here? If you do stripes around a cylinder, what happens to the stripes as you get closer to the edge? Like if you had a striped t-shirt, say this guy's wearing a striped t-shirt, you'd have a stripe here, you'd have a stripe here. Now, as you start to get closer to the edge, the space between those stripes would start to get foreshortened, right? So it starts to get closer together as you turn the form like that, right? So as you're working around the form, stripes get closer, they get tighter. So if we're considering these guys, as you move to the edge of it, it gets smaller. The space right here for the texture is really big. You're going to have like really big old fat chunks of texture right there. But then as you're moving your way around it, you're going to start to get littler and littler. Here, this will be like a branch that broke. That gives me cool edge detail right there. And I'm just thinking of the spaces between these. And look at this edge, because I decided to make this thing hickory. At this edge, it would look like this. The same as when we do normal shading, you get a terminator here, you get a darkness right at the turn. let's say this branch came out over like this, and it had a bunch of leaves on it. Like if this was a branch and it had a volume like that, right? And if it was covered in leaves, and so the first thing that I want to ask you guys to think about is I want you guys to think about the three contours. Okay, so you've got the contour that's up against the light, the contour that's carrying the shadow, and the contour through the middle. So you've got this contour right here, which is all these little, it's all these little shapes, right? And this contour is also this whole preponderance of little shapes. And then there's this third contour, which is right here, which is also a whole pile of tiny shapes. These like leaf shapes are coming through here, okay? And half of this thing is going to end up in shadow, like right over here. And half of it is going to end up in light. And I can be like, you know, this texture is, it's not enough. Like the edge, it's not interesting enough for leaves. Like leaves would have a more interesting edge texture. And also, I would say that this would want to darken here because wood is not white. And then if that darkened, then this would want to darken. Another thing that we could do is that we could grow roots out along these rocks. So in order to grow roots out along these rocks, I need to pass bendy cylinders, right? I'm just going to take like bendy cylinders that go like this. And they're cross contours. And they might have a light side and a dark side. The leaves are also darker than what I'm making them. So when you're down, so like we're drawing leaves here, right? And you see this shape, this shape. What's happening with leaves is it's a million little forms, and they're all popped together, okay? And we can't draw a million little forms all popped together. So what we have to do is we have to come up with a way to kind of fake it. And part of how you can do that is by having some control of your mark making. Okay, so like in the shadow, you see how I'm doing the shadow right now? I'm shading this as though it was like a portrait. Right? Like it looks like it could be like super smooth, this surface. But if I went back at it like this, say I go back at it with these like little marks, and I allow for there to be some variety, I'm just doing these like little like chisel marks, almost like little bite marks. And I'm not drawing like leaf shapes. I'm just drawing variety of values within a tight range. It's in the shadow. It's not like from light to dark. It's like from dark medium to dark. Again, real control at the edge. You're kind of like, in the middle, it's very relaxing. It's like almost anything goes. So long as it starts to show and you can just have like an individual leaf or some coming out. And then as I move into the light, same thing. I'm going to change the I'm going to add a variety of textures. I don't know if that chair goes down. I'm not positive. You let me know. You gain a lot by, you see this edge right here that I'm working on? You gain a lot by letting this one little edge be dark. Because what it starts to look like is, it starts to look like reflected light is filling this space right there. Okay? Okay, so let's say let's say that's kind of the natural environment textures. Let's say we're gonna start in with a built environment. So let's start out with a stone wall. So we'll say his belt is gonna be a stone wall. So coming through here, in a stone wall, you have these irregular shaped boxes like this. Right? And they're stacked on each other, except like these are broken like this. You know, none of them are perfect, and the spaces between them are bigger and smaller. So you could say like right here, I'm just going to start to work my way around. And again, the stuff that's facing me has a bigger surface than the stuff that's turning to the side of me. So if I'm like here, I want to put this underneath my hand so that I'm not on top of my drawing. It'll help my drawing. So here I'm just taking stone and stacking it. And I'm looking for these irregular shapes. But then as I move to the side, they start to go into perspective, so they want to get smaller as I'm moving around the edge of this thing. The other thing that I'm doing with it is, you see the contour line that I'm using? You see this contour line? Notice how it's going like that, because it's above my head, right? So the thing is, like, I'm looking up into this texture. Another thing that I want to do is I want to light it from this way. Okay, so my light shape starts there. I'm going to look for the contour of that shadow. I'm going to go to the edge, and I'm going to look for the contour of the edge there. I'm moving over into the light here. These are all like facing the light. I want to let myself darken them because they're not that light, lessening the details in the shadow side. I want to imagine this part of his body here as clapboard siding. So I want to think of it as sort of an octagon type house, or maybe like a six-sided structure. And again, I'm going to say the shadow for this is going to start about here. This will be deeper shadow. So the siding would go like this. It would go like and then I want to readdress the edge of this form. So every bit of siding needs to come over like that. And then this would get, you would see some here too. Okay, this edge here is where this is another critical edge. So look at how I'm throwing in the detail of the siding at that edge. And then this becomes another critical edge. Okay, because it's like a house-like structure, I want to add a window. So a window is a hole in the form. There's a sash. As I get up to the head, I want to start to imagine the head is made of like sheet metal. Like imagine like a battleship or something like that. Like so we're like moving forward in time here. We've gone from wooden siding to like that could be 1850. Now we're going to like move up to World War II era. I'm going to start to think of this as it's still going to have, the light will still be cutting across it like this. Okay, here's where the light ends. And that's reflected light over there. So let's draw some sheets of metal crossing over this. And I want to make them like patchwork. And then look for areas on the edge that I can show the detail of that, like just a little. And again, the stuff is, it's not white. It's kind of gray. But because it's metal, it will carry a certain amount of light. And then you want to clean out the light sides of it. I can't really get in and do it. I could take like this, and you see how I'm going to put this on that edge, and we erase right there. I'll get a nice little line of light, and then beyond it. And then I'll look for areas where I can put like what looks and feels like rivets. And I might try to add some smaller chunks. I want to make his arms kind of furry. So if his arms were kind of furry, the first place that I'd go to do that would be the edge. And I'm going to cut out a shadow shape. And this whole one is going to be in shadow. I'm going to start from the edge of that shadow and gently add marks like value differentiation into the light that feels suggestive of the texture that I want to communicate. If I really wanted this edge to be like kind of impressive, I could add dark behind it. See how much mileage we get out of edge detail? Notice how I'm not even like finishing stuff. I'm just like a little suggestion, a little suggestion, a little suggestion. I don't know what to do with this dude's hands. Oh, here. Let's say that the hands are like super shiny steel. Okay. So to start to make it look like really shiny steel, what you have to do, you'll start with the basic light, the basic direction of light, which is coming from over here, okay? So we'll say there's a basic light direction. And if you're doing something like that, a thing that you might want to do is you can actually take your finger, because this is steel, right? So making that like incredibly smooth, and I'm pushing it through into the light. Then going along the contour of the steel, like here's this tree from over here, okay? And it moves along the contour of the steel, and it comes up, you see this shape here, and then it goes over, and it comes into that like weird house shape there. So this would be this reflection that runs along this. Who knows, maybe that reflection would have, come on. Maybe that reflection would have like a light right on it. And there would be a highlight. And there might be some other reflection over here. Some other reflection right here. It could be small lights. I'm going to take this one and imagine that it's like a bottle. So there's a couple of moves if we're looking at something through glass. One move is this, like when you hit the edge of the glass, if you take the form and like shift it like this, so say the form starts to there, and then it comes, it just like shifts. And then the underside of it would be a little bit darker. And then this thing happens with glass where, so the light comes through it this way, right? So what'll happen is it'll have regular form light, like this is regular form light. It'll be a smooth transition. And then you can have a terminator. And then what happens is the light passes through, and like right here, because this object is translucent, like this will become really light in here. It's like the way an eyeball is. And I'll see the thickness of the glass, like into the edge of the thickness of the glass. And then another thing is highlights and specular highlights, like so anything from the environment can reflect into it. So you can get these like really crazy pops of light here and there. And then the other thing, you could get a reflection in it of like, say this tree could be reflected along the surface of it. That was a kind of a bad call, that reflection, because it lines up so cleanly with the tree.